I first want to acknowledge my co-conspirator in all of this work, and Andrea Romero, who is the facilitator of the task force on best practices, who has led not only this work, but all of the other activities of the task force, which you will be hearing about in several other presentations within this same webinar series. So Andrea is really behind, worked very, very closely with me and the other members of the sub-task force. So we're dealing with a complex array of global problems that are all interrelated, and this is going to require bold global solutions to ameliorate some of these problems. And I really think we need to ask ourselves the question, are we ready? And what do we need to do to really be ready? Not to approach individual problems, but also to try to approach these as globally connected problems. And the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration really has given us a platform to begin to develop some of these solutions. At least I think that it is a platform to do this, as well as to integrate with other initiatives that are going on internationally and nationally. There are bold targets that we are seeing, and the UN Decade has their own bold targets to accomplish by 2030, restoration of 1 billion hectares across all different types of ecosystems. And these are very broad scale targets, but there are lots of questions, nitty-gritty questions that come up, like, where should restoration be done? Where, how, what scale, who's going to do it, who makes those decisions? And in order to really make this restoration participatory and make it address the needs of people, we really need to raise the capacities of all of the stakeholders involved, and to really achieve the decade's goals. This is really a huge outreach program that we need to undertake. And there are 5 task forces that were created with the UN Decade, and I'm only going to be really discussing the work of the first one here, the best practices, which is led by FAO. Each of the monitoring is also led by FAO. But these other task forces are led by other groups. And actually, when I get to the part about the initiatives, you'll see that we are bringing in some of these other task forces in the action plan that I'm talking about. The task force on best practices has been operating for over 2 years, and it is really a very large group involving over 320 members from 130 different organizations. So it is not just a group of people working at FAO. Really involves broad engagement of people from many, many different types of work and internationally. And I'm going to focus today on the capacity needs assessment that we did from this task force and the development of the knowledge and learning plan, which came to be called the Capacity, Knowledge, and Learning Action Plan. We started out really viewing this as the need to address all different kinds of capacities, because the different stakeholders engaged in restoration are all coming from different places, and they all have different types of things they need to do, and they need different types of capacities. First of all, we have the need for technical capacities, for design and implementation. For program and project design, we need capacity. We need to learn how to form multi-stakeholder collaboration and platforms and do this well and engage all of the relevant stakeholders. We need to develop institutional capacities for aligning policies that tend to be initially very sectoral and to make them more holistic. Entrepreneurial and investment capacities in the private sector to make business and finance models that work, that support restoration implementation. We need to enhance social capacities and learn how to engage all of the right people, to understand the different stakeholders, to listen and respect all the groups involved. And we need system-wide capacities to learn collectively and to share knowledge and information. So that's a daunting task. How are we going to do all this by 2030? Well, our approach in developing this action plan is really to enhance system-wide restoration capacity. So not to focus on any particular group, but to really focus on how to enhance the knowledge and skills of individuals who are working in restoration, but whose work relies on the performance of the organizations in which they work. So we need to enhance both individuals and organizations. And by doing so, we will be enhancing the enabling environment. And the enabling environment, as it becomes more helpful to restoration, is also then going to feed back and improve the capacity of individuals and organizations. So this is sort of a system approach that we're taking. And when we talk about capacity, we really have to define what we mean. We're really trying to enhance the ability of individuals and communities and organizations to take effective actions that will transform degraded socio-ecological systems into restored and resilient socio-ecological systems. Well, to do this really requires a multi-pronged effort to strengthen all forms of capital. So not just natural capital, but cultural capital, human capital, social capital, built capital and infrastructure, political capital, and of course, the financial capital. If we are enhancing all of these capitals, we are also creating better enabling conditions, which are going to feed back and improve all of the capitals. So how to make all of these things move upwards within the same overall goal is really what we mean by capacity development. To come to our capacity, knowledge, and learning action plan, we use two basic sources of information. The first is based on identifying gaps from a global capacity needs assessment, which was a survey, and I'll be presenting some of that information in a moment. We then did a stock taking, and this involved many members of the sub-task force. What are the knowledge products and capacity development initiatives that are already out there? Are they freely available? Where can we find them? Who is providing them? Who are the main target groups? We have over 500 of these such products and capacity development initiatives already documented. This gave us a really good idea of what's already being done, and then we could see gaps in what wasn't being done. And also it gave us insight into some really successful programs and partnerships that are already in place that we could build on with the action plan. So the objectives in creating this action plan are threefold. First of all, we wanted to replicate or extend existing programs. We didn't want to start from scratch. We wanted to use what's already being developed and build on it and make those programs more effective, have larger ambition, be more disseminated. Second, we wanted to see where their gaps were. So what kinds of things are not being provided to different target groups, who's being left out of what's being done currently, and what kind of knowledge products are needed. And then third, to elaborate terms of reference for each of these gaps or priority products that we identified. So what you're going to see is really a very early stage to simply lay out the terms of references for 8 different initiatives that we hope will be implemented starting this year. The sub-task force was extremely helpful in all of this and all of these activities, and I want to recognize the many people who worked on the sub-task force and helped us to get to the action plan itself. So first, I want to give some of the outcomes of the Global Capacity Needs Assessment. This was conducted in 2021, and was the goal was to identify key gaps and capacity priorities to support the decade on ecosystem restoration. We had over 1,300 respondents, and a pretty good representation across the world, with an emphasis on Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. And the vast majority of the respondents of the survey work with forest and farmland ecosystems and montane ecosystems to some extent. We had much less representation for marine and urban ecosystems, and for grassland and freshwater. So we supplemented some of those responses with more detailed interviews. We had pretty good representation of gender, 33% women and 65% men in the survey. We asked, do you have access to professional capacity development opportunities in your work? So this is more getting at the individual capacity question. And we found that roughly 30% of the people who responded across different regions had no access to any professional capacity development. So we think that this is underscores the importance of the action plan, and thinking about how we can improve the capacity of individuals working in restoration. There are, though, some programs available and some good access. So we're pleased to see that a lot of people do have access to capacity development. We asked the respondents to identify with a particular stakeholder group, and that was important because each stakeholder group had a separate set of questions regarding capacity needs that listed a whole lot of different things, and they were ranked by no capacity to all the way up to full capacity. And that's the information we used to really get at the gaps that you'll see. One group was the national and international levels of government and NGOs. The second level were subnational or community based local or subnational NGOs and government organizations. We also had research and education people involved. We had donor, investor, and private sector identified. And we had a final group, which was more civil society groups working at the community level, such as land users, indigenous organizations, community organizations, women's organizations, other such groups. Our survey was had a large proportion of respondents from this first group, the national and international level. So that's a bit of a bias, but we had pretty good representation of all of the groups in the survey, which we were pleased with. So these were the aspects that rose to the top, meaning they had no capacity or very, very poor capacity identified by the respondents in these sectors. The governments and NGOs working at the international and national level emphasized the need to raise capacity to mobilize finance from different and even non-traditional funding sources, to engage actors across sectors that they have not yet engaged with, in particular from the finance sector, mining, and energy sectors, and to raise capacity to develop national policy instruments that foster ecosystem restoration. The government level, subnational and local level organizations emphasize that they need capacity to identify and engage different types of stakeholders, to develop financing plans for restoration, to assess the costs and benefits of different restoration interventions, and to develop supply chains, markets, and value chains for restoration. The group that identified as researchers and educators have identified a need to develop capacity for making economic and bankable business models of restoration benefits, to identify the social and biophysical costs and benefits, develop spatial models for optimizing restoration implementation and outcomes, harmonizing and reforming extension programs that across different sectors, and developing tools to support evidence-based decisions and to catalyze ecosystem restoration at large scale. The investor sector, private sector, emphasized the need to raise more capacity to implement long-term funding commitments and mechanisms, to establish risk sharing and risk mitigation mechanisms. That was a big one. To develop innovative finance solutions, to facilitate wider access to finance support, and get a better understanding of different funding instruments and market players. And finally, to strengthen and establish community value chains. And the land user and civil society groups also need capacity to mobilize finance from different funding sources, to mediate land use conflicts, to strengthen land rights, map their geographic boundaries of interventions, to document and archive Indigenous and traditional restoration practices, and to strengthen or establish value chains and producer organizations. So you can see some common themes that came out of this assessment that we will be building on in the action plan. We also asked the respondents where they get their information or capacity, their knowledge and capacity from. And each of the sectors is just color coded here. But you can see this group here, that got their sources from academic, is generally the largest proportion of sources. So most people get their information from their training, their university-based training. They're also getting a lot of information from online platforms and public facilities like botanical gardens. Sorry, but I want to point out something interesting here, that the local environment, the land user community and civil society groups, they get most of their information from small and national NGOs and local environmental groups that they are directly engaged with, and that are funneling information to them and providing capacity support. So that understanding these sources is really important as we develop the action plan. We also asked where people get their funding for restoration. And again, we see government agencies figuring very prominently overall in financing restoration activities. The investor group gets most of their money from industry, not too surprising. But here again, the land user and civil society groups are mostly internally financing their restoration. They don't have a lot of good, reliable external funding sources. So that also cued us in on some needs to really raise the capacity for fundraising of those groups. So we do have a plan. It is completed, but it is still not posted on the internet. So there will be a link later that you can sign in and register for getting information when that is published. So now I'm going to go into the details of the action plan. We have 8 key capacity and knowledge development initiatives, and they really do reflect those detailed capacity needs that I just went over, which is why I went through those in some detail, because we want this to resonate with those needs. 2 of these initiatives are focused on education. I'll be going into these in more detail. But one is more professional education, university-based education, and the second is more primary and secondary schools. 2 of these focus on community groups, smallholder farmers, or Indigenous peoples and their organizations. One initiative focuses on extension services. One focuses on national and subnational policy makers, and 2 focus on private sector. One is more focused on linking investors with researchers who can model costs and benefits and model and create business models for restoration. And one is more focused on the corporate CEOs and social responsibility managers. So we may not be able to accomplish everything, but we think that with this array of target groups and initiatives, we will really be able to enhance the enabling conditions and raise capacities system-wide, which was our goal. The first initiative is we call the Ecosystem Restoration Professional Education and Learning Platform. And professional is the operative word here. We want to make doing restoration a profession, something that, you know, kids in high school decide, I want to become a restoration professional. Where do I go to get my training? What can I do to learn more about this? So this is focused on university students, but also on the educators in the system and on organizations that are implementing capacity building. The goal is to enhance dissemination of existing education and capacity development initiatives and to build on existing partnerships that are already forming, but also to enable new initiatives and partnerships so that we can really expand what is being offered. And each of these initiatives also is connected with the restoration challenges that have been identified by the UN Decade Action Plan. So this one is connected with number 6, education. The professional platform will be, we see 3 main groups that are utilizing it. The first are individuals who want to seek formal and informal educational opportunities and capacity development programs. So these could be university degree programs. They could also be things like certificate programs for retooling, or they could just be, you know, just where to go to get their training initially. We see educators being involved, those who really synthesize and deliver the content in courses or develop curricula. And the third group are organizations and government agencies who want to develop partnerships with educators to actually deliver their own capacity development programs for staff or to other groups that they're working with. The major tasks, there are more than 3, but I just wanted to highlight 3 here. So these are sort of the TORs. One is to collect and organize information and resources regarding restoration educator networks, partnerships, and communities of practice. So who's already working together. Then we also want to have a translation facility. This could be maybe an on-demand sort of facility where educators want to use materials, but they need to have them translated in languages that are appropriate for their students or their clients. And they could request translation and it would be provided. Also providing access to shared educational resources. So for those educators that are willing to share their resources, nobody would be required. They could share videos, instructional formats, curricula, and specific content with other educators to help them develop their programs. We have already identified partners who have agreed to work on this initiative, including the Global Landscapes Forum, the Landscape Academy, Society for Ecological Restoration, SER Europe, and the Rewilding Academy. These groups already have platforms developed or are starting to. So the idea would be to essentially have like a meta platform that would really feed a lot of this information into one place, one-stop shopping. The second initiative is the Ecosystem Restoration Youth Education and Learning Platform. Main target group here is primary and secondary students and their teachers. So the goal here is to really create a digital platform for sharing educational initiatives and materials that could be used in primary and secondary, that are being used in primary and secondary education, and also hands-on learning experiences for school children, including extracurricular outside of school activities, providing tools for youth stewardship and engagement in ecosystem restoration in their communities, and to adapt education materials and knowledge products that were written for more professional audience, to adapt those to primary and secondary students. So to use that kind of knowledge products, format them in ways that are accessible. This would engage the UNESCO group. We've had several great discussions with them, and the UN Decade Youth Taskforce, as well as the Foundation for Environmental Education and FAO. The third initiative is the community-based ecosystem restoration mechanism. This would target community groups and civil society groups. So that was one of the sectors that we engaged very heavily in the survey. And the idea here is not just to enhance one type of capacity, but to really provide an all-purpose capacity development mechanism. Yes, it would enhance technical capacity of communities, but also help to develop their capacity to mobilize finance from public and private sector sources, to identify particular sources that would be appropriate for community projects, and to help them learn how to sort of market their activities and write proposals and engage funders. And to enhance their functional capacities, that is administrative capacity and capacity to perform well as organizations. And for this mechanism, we see three major functions. That is to actually understand what models out there really work well for community-based restoration programs and for enhancing community capacity, to get a better understanding of what are some good models that are already out there and how do they work well. And that's important for scaling up. So second, this group would develop a diagnostic for prioritizing the capacity and resource needs that could be more broadly applied. So where do we start? What are our most critical capacity needs? Helping communities identify those priorities. And third, to create a digital space that would really enable peer-to-peer knowledge and capacity exchange across communities, to help them learn from each other. What has worked, what hasn't worked, what have been their lessons learned, what have been their challenges. This would involve several groups that are already working very much at in community capacity, RECOFT, World Vision, and also some groups at FAO. And I should say, in identifying these partners, this is just the beginning. Some groups of partners that would start things off, but we would have much, much larger engagement in all of these initiatives than the ones I'm listing here. Fourth, the Indigenous Peoples Biocentric Restoration Initiative. This targets Indigenous peoples and their organizations they've developed. The main goal would be to increase the understanding of Indigenous peoples' territorial management and knowledge and food systems, and to illustrate their role in ecosystem and landscape restoration, to promote restoration of Indigenous peoples' territories based on their own knowledge systems, and to highlight the role of and the synergies that with Indigenous people in ecosystem and landscape restoration projects and initiatives. The major tasks of this group would be to support a group that's already existing, the Indigenous Peoples Biocentric Restoration Initiative, to support implementation of their projects in collaboration with Indigenous communities in different countries, and to document and systematize experiences of these groups to generate more information and evidence about their whole biocentric models, and to use this information to develop a global publication and to host regional events that on FLR and Indigenous people that really showcase their important role as key actors. So this is more of an educational initiative to highlight the importance of the Indigenous peoples initiatives and to bring that more into the mainstream. And we would work with the Global Hub on Indigenous Peoples Food Systems and the Coalition on Indigenous Peoples Food Systems and FAO. So this, the Initiative 5 is, we wanted to really address the huge gaps that were identified with extension advisory services, which typically have been very sectorally focused on agriculture, or focused on fisheries, or focused on forestry, and not so much focused on how these can enhance ecosystem restoration. How do we get there? How do we reach private landowners, smallholders, farmers, and their associations with extension advisory services that actually integrate ecosystem restoration knowledge and practice? So our goal with this is really to, first of all, look at what's been done and look at case studies of technical outreach where there have been pluralistic advisory services, and there are examples of this already in place. And then based on this case studies and assessments to try to outline some paths forward for how to institutionalize and sustain these educational advisory services beyond a typical project cycle, because a lot of this extension is offered as part of a project. And when that project ends, so does that advisory service. And we really need to have more long-term advisory services and have them more embedded and mainstreamed through both public and private efforts. And we need to have a path forward for how we could do that by looking at what's working and what are some examples. So this would involve a global forum for rural advisory services, which is already compiling some case studies. The sixth one focuses on national and subnational policymakers. This is a restoration policy facility. And the idea of this initiative is to enhance the capacities for policy analysis, policy reform, design, and implementation of instruments that support effective and inclusive restoration across ecosystems. So not just forest ecosystems, all ecosystems. And to focus this, to really provide resources, tools, and experiences to support effective policymaking and governance, focusing on national and subnational policymakers. The major tasks would be to build on an existing initiative called the Restoration Policy Accelerator, which is being implemented by World Resources Institute. And this is a collaborative peer-to-peer network that helps government leaders solve key problems. And it's had a very good start. And this initiative would really expand that work to more regions and more countries. And a goal is really to develop regional and national multi-stakeholder and multi-sector platforms that foster this, includes to help in the engagement issues that national level policymakers identified, engagement of stakeholders, right holders, and underrepresented groups in policymaking, and to have that be part of the initiative. And to develop systems that allow policymakers or other members of that they're working with to monitor the effectiveness of implementation of different policy instruments. This has been missing. How do we know that something's working? And certain instruments benefit only a certain group of people and marginalize others. So having some mechanism in mind for monitoring how effective these instruments have been, and then for understanding which ones need to be reformed. This would involve the World Resources Institute, FAO, and IUCN. So this is the first of the two private sector initiatives. This one is focusing on an economics and finance facility. This would bring together groups that really have not been working together before very well. It's a multi-sector facility that would involve private sector, NGOs, and researchers, as well as some government organizations. The idea is to build the capacity to develop bankable business models for ecosystem restoration and show what the project-based returns on investment might be. They would use projects to apply specific tailored economic models to achieve desired benefits that were aligned with restoration activities and approaches. So this is largely sort of a research focus. The target groups would be project implementers who are really developing self-supporting, who want to develop a self-supporting model for restoration that's based on some kind of production, but they don't quite know how or how economically viable that is. How could they sell that as something to be invested for investment? On the other hand, the funders and investors, they're looking for projects that have a well-developed business plan that is based on a robust cost-benefit analysis. So some of that analysis could be done within this initiative. And the researchers would be involved in developing economic models focused on delivery of goods and ecosystem services that are derived from restoration implementation. This would involve the UN Decade Finance Task Force, FAO, the UNEP Finance Initiative, and we've also engaged the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization. But we envision a much larger group becoming engaged in this collaborative effort. And finally, we want to increase the ambitions of corporate executives and also their social responsibility managers. But we really want the executives to get on board. And we want to develop a peer-to-peer network of executives to raise their leadership capacity and knowledge regarding ecosystem restoration, the opportunities and challenges, and how important it is to consider multiple benefits and fair distribution. There is an existing alliance, a corporate alliance of the 1T.org, a 1trilliontree.org organization of the World Economic Forum. So we want to expand that alliance to strengthen corporate leadership, ambition to promote the practice and policy and flow of resources to ecosystem restoration around the world. And this would involve also some the 1T.org group and the Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries, but doesn't necessarily have to be focused on forests alone. So one of the things that became clear when we sort of developed this full set of 8 with a lot of input from many, many people was the connections between them. And I just wanted to emphasize that they are sort of standalone initiatives, but they will really work better if they have a lot of interchange and synergies with some of the other initiatives. So we'd like to try to build in, as implementation kicks off this year, build in opportunities for this community engaged in these initiatives to get together every year, or even to have representatives sitting in the other groups so that they really can create bridges between what they're doing. And there's some obvious things. For example, a lot of the materials developed in the professional learning program can be used to create age-appropriate activities and information for youth. Also, the information coming from the Indigenous Peoples initiative will be important for both of these educational initiatives and also for community-based ecosystem mechanism. We see a lot of this interchange coming between the private sector initiatives and the extension services, because these landowners also may want to have some kind of profits coming from their restoration activities, and there could be information from the models produced in this group. So all kinds of interactions that we see here between these groups. And ultimately, the goal is to really build these enabling conditions, which have unfortunately not really been oriented toward helping restoration. So we want to turn this around through these initiatives, and that's why we need to take this systemic approach. So here's where you can sign up. You can go to this link. Maybe this link could be put in the chat, and just put your name and email in here, and you'll get a notice when this is finally published on the internet. Okay. And I would like to thank you very much, and thank Cora Van Oosten for providing some of the graphics at the beginning. Also join #GenerationRestoration and learn more about the UN Decade. And thank you so much. I'm eager to answer your questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Robin.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Robin. That was really nice. We have lots of questions here. If you allow me, I would like to start then to read those questions for you. Thank you. So the first question, yes. For your objective to replicate or extend existing programs, how are you identifying programs? Can an organization suggest a program for consideration? If so, how?
Yeah. So, very good question. We just did a lot of exploration. People involved in the task force submitted information about initiatives that they are engaged in or that they know about. We did a lot of internet searching, hours and hours, and trying to use different languages as well. And we really mined the internet as much as we could, especially for some of the educational initiatives that were out there. We looked at university websites, things like that. We tried to look at curricula as well. And, who are these targeting? Are these courses that you can take online? All these questions that we tried to get at. We would like to continue the stock taking. I think this is such a rapidly evolving activity going on that, we could probably get another 500 since the ones that we finished last spring. So we would like to have a way to have people input information about initiatives in an ongoing way, and to have that be taken up by the whichever is the appropriate group. So I think that the stock taking will continue. It could become more systematized, and we could have, through the UN Decade website, the UN Decade Hub, which is going to be starting up this year, have a place for people to input information about their initiatives.
Thank you, Robin. And also I think you already answered it, but someone asked if the education and learning platform is already available. No,
this is an initiative to create it. There are some platforms available, and some of the partners that we've engaged already do have some functionality in helping identify certain programs. But the platform, as we envision it, has to be created.
Okay. So another question: why the decision to group NGOs with government into the first and second stakeholder group? This person is asking that normally these two groups have different needs and would require different level of training. So she's asking if you explore if the responses would be different between these two groups, NGOs and government.
It is possible that, yes, we could have gotten some different information about capacity needs. We do have the data on where people work from the survey, so we could, go back and divide the answers, the respondents in that way. So I don't think we would need to do a whole new survey. We just didn't want to have too many different user groups, because each of those groups had its own separate part of the survey, and that was sort of all we could handle. really. So it was more of a logistical issue, but we thought that the distinction between working at the subnational and local level and the more national and international level would really be sufficient to give us that kind of sense of what the main capacity issues were.
Okay, thank you, Robin. So another question is, the capacity categories are key to achieving major gaps. However, what would you think about the capacity needs on site level management of smallholders farmers towards their targeted goals? How could we improve performance of different restoration strategies at local level?
That's a great question. I think that's a hugely important level for restoration. Community-based activities are generally the best restoration programs we know of. I think that the community-based restoration mechanism is really targeting exactly that. And we need to find out what communities need most. But they also need to find out get enough knowledge to know what they need, right? So, I mean, we want the initiatives to come from the communities, but also they need to get a better understanding of maybe how to package that, how to apply knowledge that they may not have access to methodologies, tools that they could use. So I think that's what this mechanism is really trying to do, to provide a toolkit. There is a community-based restoration toolkit already out there by IUCN. If I have the time, maybe I'll put that, I don't have a way to put that on. Maybe you could look that up and put it on the chat, but there's already been some work done on this. So I think we need to build on what's already been done and also get feedback from communities about what are their main needs.
Yeah, if you want to send it to me or Cara, we can share it in the chat. So some people here are asking about certificates here in the Q&A question. So just to inform the audience that if you need a certificate, you can write me and we produce a certificate to you. And also some people are asking about the presentation. The presentation will be available on our YouTube channel. One other person is asking, is anyone else focusing on restoration carried landscapes? I would like to know where we fit in, please. So yeah, maybe not, yeah, queried landscapes. I'm not familiar with this word in English, so maybe not clear. So another question, what capacity building activity require in-person training versus internet-based training? Yeah.
No, that's a very important question. I think a lot of sort of the more underlying theory, examples, a lot of sort of the inspirational types of information can be done through online training. But restoration has to be based on the ground activities. And, you know, there's only so far that online information can go as far as giving a person the full experience and understanding what information is involved. There are some examples of online certificate courses that also involve an on-the-ground component, or a university, you know, one where the professor is engaged with the student directly to do a project. So those are excellent ways to sort of get a lot of the background that you need, but also get some experience directly.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, the other question that someone rephrased here is, what capacity building activities is there any focus on restoration of mining landscapes? This person works with mining landscapes and would like to know how they would fit in the whole thing.
There is not a specific initiative focused on mining landscapes. In fact, the initiatives don't focus on any specific ecosystem or landscape. They're really made to be inclusive of all landscapes. So we're not really targeting specific ecosystems with this initiative. We're more targeting the capacity building in general.
Okay, Robin. Yeah, I think so far we are finished with the questions. I thank you very much. It's really nice. So I don't know if Cara has something else to add, please.
Well, we really appreciate your sharing your time and knowledge, Robin. Thanks so much. And to all of our participants, we really appreciate your time as well. There was a message in the chat about the link being broken for membership in CEM. So if you're interested in information about joining IUCN's Commission on Ecosystem Management, that's CEM, and its Ecosystem Restoration Thematic Group, please send me an email. I did put my email in the chat, and I'll make sure to get you the correct link. I also put the link for you to request a copy of the action plan that Robin went over. It should be available shortly. It's currently with the designers, and we're waiting for the final publication that we can share, along with the executive summary of the standards of practice for ecosystem restoration, which we'll have a presentation on later in the year. So you can request both of those. In the link, it says COP15 documents. You're in the right place. It's just that those two, we provided this link at the COP for people to sign up for. So if you put your email, as soon as it's ready, we'll send you the link. So we hope we will see many of you next month. We are focusing on global initiatives in restoration this year with the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework coming out. We'll be having presentations on that topic, as well as featuring the UN Decade flagships. We aim to have a full calendar of events ready soon. And so we'll be posting the full year. You can add those to your calendar as well. So thanks. We'll see you next month, third Friday of the month.
And I would just like to add, Robin, that all the questions and comments here all congratulate you and thank you for your talk, okay? And also there are more questions here about certificates. Please, if you need a certificate, write an email to me or to Cara. I'm the contact here for this, so just write us an email, please. Don't leave your emails here in the chat, but write me an email that I can reply you with a certificate. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and while we're on housekeeping, I'll just add one more thing, that if you go to YouTube and you hit the little bell icon, then when we post new videos, you will get a notification through YouTube that there's a new video posted to see. Okay, see you next month. Thanks so much.
See you.